Top 10 movie mistakes only a historian would notice. Something about the words, based on a true story, flashing across the screen has the ability to capture a viewer's attention unlike anything else. History is full of noteworthy people and events that are just right for the screenwriter's picking and often result in hugely successful movies. However, try as they might, filmmakers who attempt to portray anything about the past very seldom satisfy their harshest critics. Don't forget to watch today's video in full to learn about the top 10 movie mistakes only a historian would notice. Number 10. JFK conspiracy theories abound regarding the assassination of U.S. President John F. Kennedy. But controversy really ignited in 1991 when Oliver Stone released the film JFK, which posits that one fringe theory surrounding the murder is fact and follows New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison as he investigates it. The theory in question poses that many parties, including the military, FBI, and CIA, were involved in a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, perhaps to stop him from pulling out of Vietnam. It even blames Lyndon Johnson for helping in the cover-up. Of course, there are those who subscribe to this particular theory or others like it. But if we're to trust the accepted beliefs of most historians, JFK is pure fiction. In addition to that, critics of Stone like Patricia Lambert argue that the filmmaker fabricated events that contradict known facts. For instance, the movie depicts David Ferrie, one of Garrison's suspects, confessing to assisting in the conspiracy. In reality, argues Lambert, Ferrie adamantly denied involvement and offered to take a lie detector test to prove it. Errors of omission particularly incense critics, such as how Stone left out the fact that Garrison's key testimony was brought on by drugging and hypnosis. Number 9. Pocahontas. No one really complains when Disney waters down the grisly grim fairy tales with family-friendly overtones. But although Disney has a reputation for putting its own spin on those tales, the company fueled the ire of critics when it rewrote history. This happened in 1995, when Disney released its own version of the Pocahontas story. In the Disney film, a romance emerges between Pocahontas, a member of the Powhatan tribe, and the British settler, John Smith. The story reaches its climax when Pocahontas throws herself on Smith to save his life. Disney's brazen disregard for the truth immediately irked those familiar with the well-known story in U.S. history. Although it may be true, as Smith later said, that Pocahontas intervened to save his life, she was only 10 or 11 years old when she made the gesture. The film depicts them both as adults. The filmmakers completely fabricated the idea that love blossomed between them, and historians dismiss this idea out of hand. Smith did, however, befriend the young girl, and she often visited the Jamestown settlement, sometimes bringing gifts and once saving the settlers from an ambush. She eventually did marry a British man, but it was John Rolfe, not Smith. Were this film not directed toward children, who are less likely to know the real story, it could perhaps be dismissed as harmless historical fiction. But as it portrays real historical figures, critics complain that Pocahontas easily misleads children and interferes with the events they'll later learn about. Number 8. The Bridge on the River Kwai. Nicholson seeks to improve his men's morale by forcing them to build a solid, well-constructed bridge. Not until the dramatic end does the obsessive Nicholson recognize the folly of assisting the enemy in war and destroy the bridge. Although his name wasn't Nicholson, Lt. Col. Philip Toucey was the senior British officer who commanded operations for building the Thai-Burma Railway, the inspiration for the movie. Those who knew the real story objected that it tainted Toucey's honorable reputation. Toucey's obsession was not building the bridge, but rather keeping his men alive. His admirers claimed he did the best he could to keep his men safe while not giving aid to the enemy. Number 7. Shakespeare in Love. Frustrated by the lack of information, some writers have chosen to indulge in conjecture by weaving tales of historical fiction into the knowledge gaps. One example of such conjecture is the movie Shakespeare in Love, 1998. In this steamy romance, Shakespeare finds his inspiration for the play Romeo and Juliet after falling in love with a young lady who aspires to be an actress. But historians have no reason to think that such a romance inspired Shakespeare's well-known tragedy. In fact, Shakespeare adapted the play's plot from other sources, So the idea that he developed the story gradually and hadn't figured out the tragic ending by the time he was writing the middle, as the film depicts, is highly unlikely. There is the respected suspicion, however, that a woman of dark complexion, known to scholars as the Dark Lady, inspired many of his sonnets. Hence, critics question why the filmmakers didn't instead focus on this more likely romance. On a related note of inaccuracy, some take issue that the movie features no black characters in a time when London had a significant black population. Number 6. The Far Horizons. Many of the movies we cover in this list share a common theme. They try to infuse sexual tension and a love story between historical people where no romance really existed. Interestingly, The Far Horizons, 1955, does something very similar to Pocahontas. It tries to create this tension between a Native American girl and a white explorer, both of whom are well known in U.S. history. Something about this formula must carry some resonance with American audiences. The Far Horizons is set about 200 years after Pocahontas, but it's just as inaccurate. If you're at all familiar with the story, you know that along the way, they encountered a very helpful woman from the Shoshone tribe named Sacagawea. In the movie, Sacagawea and Clark fall in love while traversing hostile territory and battling the jealous villain Toussaint Charbonneau. The only problem is, the movie failed to mention an important historical point. Sacagawea was married to Charbonneau. The explorers hired Charbonneau, a French-Canadian trader, as an interpreter and agreed to let his pregnant wife tag along. She proved extremely helpful to the party but never, as far as historians know, made a move on William Clark. Number 5. Braveheart. When Braveheart came out in 1995, it was an instant success. Director and actor Mel Gibson's portrayal of Scotland's hero William Wallace mesmerized audiences and won the movie 5 Oscars. The film is set in 13th century Scotland, when Wallace returns to his homeland to find it oppressed and taken over by the brutal, pagan King of England, Edward I. After the English soldiers kill Wallace's bride, he becomes enraged and driven to lead the Scottish in a revolt to expel the English. Against all odds, Wallace commands a stunning victory against the English in the Battle of Stirling Bridge. As he continues his revolt, he also has a love affair with Isabella, Edward's daughter-in-law. King Edward, as far as historians know, never instituted the idea of prime noctes, which allowed the British officers to be the first to deflower a new bride. Also, the Scottish rebels wear kilts throughout the film, which according to historians, they wouldn't have sported. Number 4. Gladiator. To his credit, director Ridley Scott employed a thoroughly qualified historian to help him make his film Gladiator 2000 as authentic as possible. Source: Winkler. This is despite the fact that Maximus, the main character portrayed by Russell Crowe, is fictional, and yet the movie, set in ancient Rome, still manages to tick off plenty of historians. In the film, Emperor Marcus Aurelius doesn't trust his son, Commodus, and instead taps Maximus, an esteemed general, to take over and return Rome to the Old Republic. Betrayed, Commodus kills his father and orders Maximus' execution. But Maximus escapes, gets captured by slave traders, and ends up as a gladiator fighting for his life in the arena. Historians scoff at plenty of assumptions in this film, especially the notion that Marcus would have wanted to return to the Old Republic. In addition to that, the movie compresses Commodus' 13-year reign into what can't be more than 2 years. Commodus himself was younger and more physically fit than depicted, married, and, not to mention, didn't commit patricide. Number 3. Battle of the Bulge. Although filming only 20 years after the actual battle, the filmmakers managed to forget a lot of important details. They shot what's supposed to be a bitterly cold Belgian winter in the temperate climate of Spain and made a half-hearted attempt to recreate the cold weather. The film also lacks the hilly and wooded terrain of the real battle. The Battle of the Bulge was primarily a tank battle, and historians find the tanks in the movie laughably inaccurate. In addition to being unlike the real Tiger and Sherman tanks used in battle, the newer Korean War-era tanks employed aren't even the appropriate color. And although fuel and resources were an issue in wearing down the Germans, historians claim the real scenario was very different from what was depicted in the ending of the movie. The movie incensed former U.S. President and Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower so much that he emerged from retirement to state his disapproval in a press conference. Number 2. They Died with Their Boots On. No list of this kind would be complete without They Died with Their Boots On, 1941, which film historians cite as the quintessential historically inaccurate film. Historian Alvin Joseph Jr. writes that the movie runs completely amok with history. The story follows U.S. Civil War hero George Armstrong Custer through his life and military exploits, culminating in the controversial battle that took his life along with the 200 soldiers he led. First of all, the film exaggerates Custer's war record. It also chalks up his military promotion to an administrative mistake, which it wasn't. Not only that, but the movie depicts Custer turning to alcohol in 1865, when in reality he swore off the stuff after an embarrassing incident in 1862. Modern viewers take issue with the movie's stereotypical, one-dimensional depiction of Native Americans as well, particularly Chief Crazy Horse, the Lakota Sioux War Chief. Number 1. Pearl Harbor historian Lawrence Seward has said that the film's action bears little more than a remote resemblance to the real event. In addition, Rafe and Danny shoot down dozens of planes during the attack, while the real U.S. pilots get much fewer. What's more, no fighter pilots would have been sent to Tokyo to serve as bomber pilots. Some even more ridiculous inaccuracies amuse historians. For instance, the film lips a fictional line from the Japanese admiral directly from Tora, a 1970 movie about the attack. Also, the idea that a crippled Franklin Delano Roosevelt would get up from his wheelchair doesn't seem to have any basis in reality. With that, we come to the end of this video. Don't forget to join in the next time for more of such interesting content.
Time to